Hello and welcome along once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the podcast which is a bit on the small side for its year group and whose parents are worried that the bigger kids are going to start picking on them when they go to secondary school in September, if they're being honest. I'm Stu Joslin, your Year 5 school council rep, and joining me as always is Alex Greenwood. Greenie, hello mate. The first thing I have to ask is, how did you get on at Limp Bizkit the other night?
Oh, I had an absolute blast. It was incredible. It was definitely one of the best gigs I've ever been to. The best live bands to ever come out of the 90s for sure. In my opinion, one of the best bands full stop to ever come out of the 90s. Yeah, went with legend of the pod, Big Tim Parker, down to Wembley Arena.
Excellent.
And just partied like it was 1999. How about you? Have you seen any legends of the 90s recently?
I have, just last night actually. I went to see Danny Baker, one of my favourite ever broadcasters, on his sausage sandwich tour down at Comedia in Bath. And I was just telling you before we started, 3 hours and 10 minutes in total on stage. We were in there from 7:30 until just past 11 o'clock, with a small break in between sets. So no, absolutely brilliant. He was an absolute tour de force, and I would recommend it to anyone. If there are still any dates left by the time this gets released, definitely go and see Danny if you can.
Couple of potential guests there, I think. Fred Durst and Danny Baker. Maybe we could get some sort of episode.
What an absolute dream. I mean, I was thinking about hanging outside the stage door to ask Danny if he was interested, but to be honest, my parking was about to run out at that point. so I had to make a dash for the car park. But yeah, definitely one for the book, I think.
Stu, have you noticed what episode it is today? As in, what number episode?
It must be number 50, must it?
It is 50. It's the big 50. We've done it.
It's our 50th episode. That's
a half century.
Yeah. And I was reading, actually, again, just yesterday, that most podcasts don't get past 10 episodes, I think, is the average number of episodes that a podcast will have before it sort of fades away. So we're obviously high above the average. We've talked plenty of rubbish over the past couple of years, and we've got lots more to go, I hope.
We're past the half century now, and we're well on the way to the full century, I think. So.
Do you raise your bat to the pavilion for a half century?
Just a quick one, yeah. Just a quick sort of waft. And then
waft of the bat, yeah.
Get back on it, yeah.
Get back into it. Okay, so when the 100th rolls around, it will be full bats raised.
Yeah, to all four corners of the ground, yeah.
Okay, and we'll take the adulation of the adoring crowd.
I think we're currently pretty even when it comes to episodes compared to listeners in terms of numbers. So if we could, the more episodes we do, the closer or the further away we'll get from that. So
I see we're going to be on a downward trend now.
Yeah, so if we could urge you listeners again to tell all your friends and encourage them to come and join the party, then that would be fantastic.
Well, tonight is our long-awaited primary school episode where we're going to talk about some of our favourite anecdotes and memories from our primary school years in the 90s. But Alex, when September rolls around, you need your uniform. What are you going to do? How are you going to spread the cost and get that uniform paid for? Well, you could speak to our sponsors tonight, Egg Internet Banking. New customers can quote the code ALLRIGHT90s when signing up to receive 8% savings interest and 0% balance transfers during their first year. And you can take all the risk out of those scary internet purchases with an Egg credit card. So many thanks to Egg for sponsoring us tonight.
Yeah, fantastic. I always like the financial-based sponsors. It always gives an air of sort of gravitas to the pod, I think.
It really does.
That we're backed by these great financial institutions. So,
how are you feeling about maybe taking more of a controlling interest in the pod's finances? Are you feeling any more confident in that?
I think it would be fairly disastrous for the pod if I took too much more of a controlling stake. We've got advisors, we've got our financial team behind us. Well, Jeff, I mean. Mm-hmm. So, no, I think for the time being, I'm happy to leave it up to Jeff and our small group of loyal shareholders.
If I find out those Limp Bizkit tickets came out of pod funds, there will be trouble.
No, don't worry. This was purely out of my pocket. I've been saving up for this since I was 15, so I had the money.
So does that, you're able to get like executive box tickets then by this point? Meet and greet backstage and, share a plate of shepherd's pie with Fred.
Oh, I wish. These were bog standard floor standing tickets, but where the mosh pit was. So
right down where the action was.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Big Tim throwing himself about, was he?
Of course he was, yeah.
Time for some correspondence, and the post bag has been red hot over the last couple of weeks with people writing in regarding their most 90s meals. You might remember we spoke about this on the last episode with our good friend Nick Charlie Key from the Fantastic History of Food podcast. Many thanks to him again for coming on and sharing his Sampion story with us. New correspondent Stephen Robbs. Hi, Steve. Thanks for listening to the podcast. He says that his most 90s meal is the Heinz Beanz Pizza. Do you have any recollection of this?
I kind of remember it. I definitely never had one, but I can kind of remember it.
I mean, you know what it is, right? It's a margarita pizza with baked beans added already, so that you can just bung it in the oven and away you go. I mean, it sounds terrible, to be honest.
It does sound odd. I have had beans on a pizza once, but it was in a restaurant, would you believe it, rather than a Heinz Beanz shop bought one. And it doesn't really work. I mean,
no, yeah, I can imagine. And he says he would augment this with a box of microchips and some alphabet spaghetti, just to round out the main 90s dinner food groups there. He also says that he's going to begin work on his own vegan recipe for crispy pancakes, because we were bemoaning the lack of a vegan crispy pancake, obviously, when we were speaking about this last time. However, more news on that from regular correspondent Alex Mitchell, who sent me some live intel from his big weekly food shop. He says that crispy pancakes are now manufactured by Birdseye, not Findus anymore. They're now Birdseye crispy pancakes. And there are both cheese and tomato variants available for the vegetarian crispy pancake aficionado, but nothing for the vegan. Like yourself, Alex. So, Steve, if you could get back in touch and let us know how you get on with that, we'd be very grateful, and we'd love to. Well, maybe we can taste test some live on the show. What do you reckon?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, that'd be amazing if we could exert more pod power to influence the mighty Heinz. Sorry, not Heinz. Birdseye into formulating a new vegan option. Then, yeah, let's go for it. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we've exerted influence over big frozen food.
Well, we've done it with big chocolate, haven't we? So, big frozen food, yeah.
Time now for What's Most 90s, and it's a musical one today, inspired by my recent trip to see the Mighty Biscuit. But this is not an American band question, because, Stu, I'm asking you what you think the most 90s British rock or metal band is.
Anybody who, like me, watches Top of the Pops repeats on BBC 4 will know that we're in 1994 at the moment. I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight the curious case of Stiltskin. Are you aware of Stiltskin?
No, I don't think I am.
Well, you should be, because he had a number one hit in 1994 with a song called Inside.
Swing low in a dark glass hour, you turn and cower, see it turn to dust. Move on a stone dark night, we take to flight, snowfall turns to rust.
And it's very, very curious, because the song had been used on a Levi's advert, and it was composed by a chap called Peter Lawler, who then got wind that the music in the advert was popular. So this band, Stiltskin, was put together especially to perform the song from the Levi's advert that this guy had written, and it got to number one. And it was number one for 2 weeks. They appeared performing it live on Top of the Pops, and they sort of did the whole rock star thing of smashing everything up on the stage and kicking all of the empty Marshall cabinets over and things like that. And then it slowly drifted out of the charts, eventually to be replaced by, of course, Love Is All Around by Wet, Wet, Wet for a very long time. But I had a look, and Stiltskin are still together with the original lead singer, a guy called Ray Wilson. But I just wanted to highlight this because it's, as I say, a very curious case, and I can't think of any situation where the song has come first and then the band has been put together around it. And Stiltskin are just a band that are locked inside the 90s because they had this one hit which wasn't a number one hit. They did release an album and release a follow-up single, but they were nowhere near as successful. And just this band that were put together in order to front this one song that then tried to make a go of it and actually do some stuff. So I wanted to highlight Stiltskin as my most 90s rock band, British rock band, sorry.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's such an interesting story. I'd never heard that before. I don't understand how they're still together now.
It's one of these things where I think it's the original lead singer is the only one who's who is still there. But yeah, as far as my research goes, they are still together and performing. Well, the band Stiltskin still exists and is still performing to this day, presumably ending every gig with Inside. And yeah, and still going now, and more power to them.
Sounds very much like a potential future guest to me. We'll discuss that off air. So I've not gone for anyone as interesting as that with any sort of backstory, but I was initially going to go for Feeder, but then I realised their career kind of peaked just after the turn of the decade, I think into the 2000s. So I've gone for Skunk Anansie instead, because this is a band who I know they reformed in the 2000s, but their main career, their three big albums were all in the 90s. I think they were 95, 96, and maybe 99, 98 or 99. Had a couple of big singles. Obviously one of the most iconic front people in British music of recent decades in Skin. But then, I just think after 99, they kind of disappeared somewhat. I mean, Skin will always be a big enough name and face for people to recognise now. I think she was recently on The Masked Singer.
She was, yes.
Yeah, which is one of the worst excuses for a television programme I've ever seen.
You've never seen Naked Attraction, then?
I have seen Naked Attraction, yeah. Which is better, I think. Less humiliating. But so she's still a big name. Yeah, I mean, she's Skin. But aside from that, the music that the band made hasn't really stuck around that much. You don't hear it on the radio that often. So that's why I've chosen them, really. I think they're a cool band, no question. Had quite a unique sound, and they did a great collaboration with Bjork for Army of Me, I think it was, which was on Top of the Pops. I'm not sure if you've got to that point on the old episodes yet, probably not.
It hasn't come up yet,
but
no.
keep an eye open for that when that comes on, because it's fantastic. But
And now, a real treat for you. It's Jack with special guest Skunk Anansie with a remix of Army of Me. Me, you, they are here.
yeah, very much a band of their era and not much longer. So that's why I've gone for Skunk Anansie.
Great choice. I love that song Hedonism, which is not actually in the song at all. It's the one, just because you feel good in the chorus, which is great track. No, excellent choice. I can't argue with that. But as always, it comes down to what are we going to put in the ledger?
I think Stiltskin have got a much more interesting story, and really, I mean, that's properly encapsulated into the 90s, isn't it? Just one big song and came from an advert. It's got to be Stiltskin.
Okay, guys, you're in the ledger, and we'll see if we can look up Ray Wilson and find out if he wants to come on and speak to us. Time then for the main feature of tonight's episode, and it's been on the slate for a while, this one. We're going to have a little chat about our favourite primary school memories and anecdotes and things from that time of our lives. We both went to school in the 90s, to primary school. I started in 1993 in reception class, so you would have been 1990 or 91?
I think it was 1990, yeah. I don't know if this was the same across the country, but it was definitely true of Regis School in Caution. But I think if you were born sort of in the summer or the spring of a year, you could delay your start, so you didn't have to start when you turned 4, because some kids would have been 4, some would have been almost 5. It would have been that's a 25% difference in your life at that age. So I was slightly delayed, so I think I was would have been 1990. So
okay, I've had no idea about that. I didn't know you could do it.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Have a thing also halfway through your school where it was around year 3 or 4, my class split and half of us went up and half of us went back down. And I think that was something to do with it. I don't know if this was a 90s school system thing that they had and maybe don't have anymore. I mean, because I don't have anything to compare it to. But did that happen in your school?
No, I don't think it did. I don't remember anything like that happening. We all progressed through the year groups together, I believe.
I'd love to know if any of our listeners were going to primary school in like the mid to early 90s and had anything like that where it's split, because I'm sort of interested to know what happened there. But I recognise that's quite unlikely that anyone will remember that. But that's what happened, and but I did start. I think I must have started in 1990. So I don't have to talk about anything that wasn't in the 90s. Do you remember your first day?
Yes and no. I remember my first day in the new site of my primary school. So just in a way of background, I went to a different primary school in Corsham. I went to Corsham County Primary, later simply Corsham Primary. And at the time that I joined, the new site on the other side of the road to where the existing site was still being finished. So I started reception year in the old site, which is still there, and it's now a very well respected Pound Art Centre in Corsham, where a lot of very good acts come to play in Corsham, which is obviously really, really good. And then we moved over into the other building when it was finally ready, 3 or 4 months in. So I spent a very short time in the old side, and then we moved over to a completely new primary school. And I remember the opening day, the first day we went there, very vividly, because all of the year groups performed a sort of march through time over the road from one school to the other, and each year group was dressed in clothes from a different decade. And I remember our reception class were dressed as children from the 1940s, and I had period sort of clothing that my parents had sourced from somewhere, and my granddad had made me a gas mask box to carry around my shoulders with obviously no gas mask in there, but it was an authentic sort of gas mask carrier. And we had this sort of procession over the road and into the new school to sort of mark the decades of learning and history that had been through and passed in the old site as we moved into the new site, which opened in 1993, as I say, and is still operating now. So yeah, in a word, I don't remember my actual first day, but I do remember the first day in the new site. What about when you rolled up into Regis? What happened there?
All I can really remember is obviously at lunchtime during the day, I would have gone into the dining hall, and I remember just wandering around aimlessly, not knowing what was going on. And eventually a dinner lady came up to me and said, are you having hot dinners or packed lunch? And even this confused me, this question. So I just guessed, and I just said hot dinners. So I sat down to my one and only ever hot dinner at school, which was, I seem to recall, something with ham in it. And it was on those blue plastic plates that you get in school dinner halls. But of course, I wasn't supposed to be hot dinners. I had a packed lunch that I'd been given by my mum. But it was a slightly confusing start to my school life. And yeah, like I say, the last time I ever had hot dinners, I think at any school, first or secondary school, because I simply was completely in a daze and forgot that I had a lunch.
So what happened then? Did your parents get charged for that, and then presumably your dad said never again? This isn't happening. In a few years' time, I'm going to have a load of Millennium Bug for compliance kits to sell, and I can't be taking out of any profits for, I can't be digging into any future profits for that to pay for your hot dinners.
It was something like that, yeah. I seem to remember my mum sort of laughing about the fact that I'd just said that I was hot dinners. But then this is like no one explains actually. No one says when you first go into school, there'll be a point where you have to decide or say whether you're having packed lunch or hot dinners, and no one explains it to you. I was like 4.5. I needed some more guidance. But
now you'll get inductions. So a child who is coming up to join a reception class will presumably get to go like for a week and get used to it and see how it all works, like you do now when you move up to secondary school. I would imagine, as I was and as you were, you're not simply taken there on the first day and then just expected to know how everything works. I think those days are gone, and it's probably for the better. I say that, but then it sort of dries out all of these entertaining stories about not knowing what your lunch is or where you're supposed to go or anything like that. I have a lunch story myself. I remember walking around the playground once. I think I was in year 3 or 4, and I was in a complete daze, crying a little bit because I couldn't find my lunchbox. Now we had when we went out to play at lunchtime, we would take our lunchboxes out and leave them along the wall next to our own classroom. So they'd be there, and then each class would get called in at various points over the lunch hour, so that the hall didn't get too overcrowded. And you would, when you heard your class's name, you would go and pick up your lunchbox and go in. So I couldn't find my lunchbox when our name was called, and I got a bit tearful about this. And as in your case, a dinner lady came over and asked me what the problem was, and I said I can't find my lunchbox. She pointed out that I was carrying it around with me. So what had happened was I hadn't put my lunchbox down when I went out to play.
Yeah.
I'd been carrying it with me, and then realised, or didn't realise, I should say, that I had it with me when I went to go and pick it up later, and thought that it was gone. So that's pretty bad. The other one is that once I had my lunch eaten by another kid before our lunchtime, so I had nothing to eat.
Oh, bloody hell.
There was a particularly poorly behaved child in our class called, we'll bleep this out, but her name was, and it was later found that she had just picked a lunchbox at random because she didn't have any lunch with her, and had just picked my lunch and eaten that. So I got a free hot dinner that day to make up for it, and I think that was one of my only hot dinners. Yeah. So we both got our only hot dinners in different circumstances.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say it was old sharpened pencil fella. I forget his name.
Oh, Damon Law. No.
Damon.
No, to be fair, he didn't know. He never caused me any food-based problems. No, just arse-based problems.
Oh. I better ask, what lunchbox did you have?
I remember it was blue, but I had augmented it with. So it presumably had something on it which had washed off when my mum had obviously washed it up at the weekend or whatever. It would have had an overlay sticker on it as the lunchboxes always did. I don't remember what that was, but once that had gone, I had augmented it with spares from my PFA 96 or 7 sticker collection. I remember vividly the smiling face of John Ebrell of Everton was on the front of that lunchbox.
I bet you were the talk of the playground with that.
What was your weapon of choice, lunchbox wise?
It was a Mickey Mouse one. It was red Mickey Mouse. I think I had a succession of 2, if that can be a succession. Different.
That's more of a pair, I would say.
Yeah, of red Mickey Mouse lunchboxes with the classic one, square box, sticker on the front, and then a matching flask in it. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, when I think back, it's kind of funny that they gave you flasks, because how many 4 to 8-year-olds were drinking tea with their lunch? Why did it need to be a flask? There's no infants getting out their mochachinos in their heated.
Oh, listen, I cannot function until I've had my coffee. Okay, I cannot function. Don't even try and put that maths book in front of me. I have to have my coffee first.
It was different in the 90s, I suppose. It was a harder time, wasn't it? You needed a bit of caffeine, so that's probably why they gave you the flask. What was in your lunchbox, dare I ask? What was your snack of choice?
Oh, blimey, now you're asking. I remember jam sandwiches were always a particular favourite. I remember a kid who I didn't know very well sitting next to me on a lunch table very early on. This is reception or year 1, and telling everybody that I had blood sandwiches because I had jam in the sandwiches. They really got me there. Really got me with that one. I would have to say that my packed lunch probably hasn't changed much from reception year 1 up until 34 years old. There would be a sandwich, there would be a bag of crisps, there would be a piece of fruit, and there would be a yogurt. That's the lunchtime quadruple that I've pretty much stick to this day, I would have to say. How about you? Oh, and the occasional Dairy Lee triangle or Dunker or something like that, if available,
Yeah. Well, much like you, my lunch hasn't really changed since then, because back in primary school I was having smashed avocado and hummus, sourdough toast. I joke, of course. No, I would have been having probably a cheese sandwich or a Marmite sandwich. Actually, peanut butter. That was my big jam. That's a confusing word to use in
jam was my
sandwiches.
Jam, as we know. So
I should say it was my big vibe back then. Would have been big. Yeah, crunchy peanut butter. But I always remember my friend Stephen having cartoonies. Do you remember cartoonies? It's you get them in a packet. They were sort of little biscuit things with chocolate in the middle, kind of bite-sized things. I've never seen them since. I mean,
sort of like Cadbury's Animals biscuits, like those.
Kind of, but the chocolate was in the inside.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of in the same sort of vein as an ice gem, that sort of bag, that sort of biscuit, but yeah, chocolate on the inside. And ice gems were another thing from that era, which was so hard. Well, ice gems was so hard. They were sort of ridiculous. Even at the time, I thought this is absurd. Even with my young teeth, this doesn't feel right. But cartoon is what I remember other people having. But I would have had, a Dairy Lee triangle or something homemade from my mum, who was a very good baker. So I was pretty lucky in that respect.
Just before we went out to play for break time, we were given a school-funded sort of 11s of 2 digestive biscuits each and a cup of orange juice, which was always a thing at about 10:30 before we went out for morning break. And I remember once our head teacher, Mr. Priest, who I actually liked Mr. Priest a lot, and the last time I saw him was actually when I did work experience at Corsham Library, which we've mentioned before. And I was I must have been 15 then, and he came into the library and recognised me, and we had a nice chat. Sadly, I don't think he's around anymore, but I had a lot of time for Mr. Priest. So he came in once with another teacher, and they had been to the supermarket or cash and carry to get them some more biscuits and orange juice, and that they had it in a big trolley, and he sort of wheeled it past where I was sitting, and I said to him, "Oh, Mr. Priest, I'd like to see the receipt for all that." Excellent. He got it out of his pocket and said, "Here you go," and he just let it drop, and it unrolled, and this massive long receipt, which obviously they'd had to get to say, "Oh, this is how much we spent on biscuits and orange juice." But just like that, he said, "There you go, Stuart," and he unrolled it, and it hit the floor from where he was holding it out with his arm, and it was one of the best things I've ever seen. And I always remember that about Mr. Priest. He was a top man.
Well, clearly Corsham County Primary was blowing the whole Northwest Wiltshire budget for the schools, the school budget, because we didn't get anything of the sort in Regis. It was that sort of thing stopped when I was at playgroup before primary school. We used to have a bit of squash and a biscuit, but after that, no, it was far tougher down at Regis. It was just get outside now and run it off, get out of our hair.
I had no idea that Regis was an enclave of North Korea. Wow. Did you all have the same haircut as well?
Yeah, now that you say it, yeah, we did. We all had wedges. Actually, did you have a uniform at County Primary? I don't think primary schools, I think in the UK you don't have to have a uniform at primary school unless it's like a public school.
Okay, no, we did. We had the maroon jumper with the griffin in the shield.
Yeah.
Which was the logo. Yeah. I know Regis was sort of a brighter red, wasn't it?
Yeah. Did you have to wear your uniform though? Was it just there was one if you wanted it?
Yeah, no, I hadn't. I had to wear the uniform.
Oh, right, okay. Regis was, in that respect, not so North Korea. It was more...
What, so uniform was optional?
Yeah. Almost everyone did wear it or wore a red jumper, but, for example, he would just wear, just a plain old tracksuit with, I don't know, turtles on it or something.
We're going to have to bleep out all these names. I think we are, aren't we?
I would be surprised if was going to start legal action against me for saying that he wore a tracksuit, but better safe than sorry, you're right, so...
There's more of a chance of that for me saying that was very poorly behaved. But then again, it's the truth.
Yeah. I think that your case will stand up in court. Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right.
In fact, I say bring it on. Speaking of legal issues, how was law and order administered in your school? Was there any, was it particularly strict? Were there any cruel and unusual punishments?
Not that I recall. Well, actually, there is one I have written down here which happened to me. I'm not sure it was much of a punishment as rather a, go away and it will sort itself out kind of thing. But as you do, and this is still when we were on the old site, I remember. So I was very young, just started, and look, I'm gonna say it. I wet myself. Okay, I was 4. All right. Well, there was some sort of accident. And I remember being sent to sit on the wall that was on the main road on Pound Pill. And
it's like a public display?
No, being made to just go and sit there to dry out. That's my recollection of that. Like for the rest of the lunch hour, just go and stand out by the road and see if you can get dried off.
Oh man. I can just picturing like a row of every day you could walk past the school and there'd be 3 or 4 kids just drying out on that same wall. The famous county primary drying out wall, we called it.
I don't know if there was anybody there with me, but that was it never happened again. That's the only toilet accident I ever remember having at school. So clearly it had the desired effect. But in terms of law and order punishment, so there was the red book, which was followed by the black book. Which was basically just a book where your name got written up if there'd been any sort of transgression. And there was a spate of kids in playtimes and other times making their own black books and going around writing each other up for various misdemeanors. And there had to be a sort of whole school APB about that to say, look, you can't write your own black books. You've got to leave it to us. You've got to leave it to the teachers. But yeah, if you went in the black book, and I have to say, and I'm not, blowing my own bugle here, but I don't think I ever was in the black book. I was quite a good boy. Although I did once fall foul of Mrs. Bellamy, who was, I'm sure, lovely, but also fearsome. If you were on the wrong side of her, and I'd been in the hall doing something, and there was some. I think it was for the year 6. She was a year 6 teacher at the time, and I think there was some sort of year 6 leavers thing going on, and there was some drapes up in the hall, which I'd sort of just played with a bit. There was some music on. I remember it was a PE lesson, and I'd got the drapes and I was making them, dance to the music. And a couple of the staples came out, but she'd obviously spent like all afternoon or whatever putting them up, and I got hauled in front of Mrs. Bellamy, and it was not great. There was a bit of shouting and a bit of finger pointing, and so I didn't do that again. But on the whole, I would say my behaviour was quite decent. How about you? Were you sort of straight and narrow or wrong side of the tracks every so often?
I was about as straight and narrow as you could get. I'm absolutely terrified of getting in trouble. A mentality which still lingers to this day, unfortunately, despite my strong anti-authoritarian mentality, which unfortunately doesn't often translate to reality. But we also had a black book in our school, so maybe this was a Wiltshire-wide thing or even a nationwide thing, which was a terrifying thing to sort of be around. And I think there was one time when me and my friend Thomas either got in it or were threatened to put in it, and we weren't quite sure whether our names were in it, because I get the sense that the teachers would use it as sort of a bit of a threat, like, oh, I'll put your names in the black book if you carry on doing that, but then they probably wouldn't. They'd probably just walk off and deal with something else. But that was the closest I ever came to getting in trouble. I have no idea what we did. It wouldn't have been a very big thing, but I was a victim of injustice. But then I can't really blame the teachers for this. But in infants, reception, I should say, the first year of primary school, the new starters were allowed to bring in some sort of teddy bear or something like that to comfort them for the first maybe 6 months or so. And I duly brought in Clipper, who was my small white teddy bear. It was called Clipper because you could squeeze his back and his paws would sort of meet like a clip, I suppose. Hence the name Clipper, and he was my companion for the start of school. And then one day at lunch break, a student called Chris. Mate, I still remember his name. It was Chris.
You're going to say something which is going to break my heart now, aren't you?
Maybe.
I'm not sure I'm ready for this.
I don't know what his surname was, so we don't have to bleep it out. But it was Chris, because I think he left the school like a year or two later, so he didn't stick around. Yeah, one lunchtime he stole Clipper off me, ran around with him for a bit, and then threw him over the school fence and into the road which ran sort of through the school. So kind of a quiet road, but it was a road.
I know, yeah.
Eventually plucked up the courage to go to the dinner lady and say, my teddy's in the road. And she sort of, from what I remember, kind of grumbled something and went to get it for me. And so I got him back. And then a few minutes later, obviously, Chris came back over to me, took Clipper off me again, and then threw him back over the fence and into the road again, which meant I had to go back over to the dinner lady and say, my bear's in the road again. And then she told me off for throwing my bear over into the road and asking why I was doing that if I still wanted him. So she did go and get him and gave him back, but chastised me for throwing my teddy into the road. And for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't say anything. I didn't say I didn't do it. I didn't say Chris did it. I just accepted the chastisement and went about my day. Unfortunately, that was the end of it with Chris for that day. But I've always thought, why did that dinner lady think that I was doing it? Why did they not
that is quite bizarre, I have to say. That's quite bizarre why they thought you would be doing that to your own prized possession.
But that was an early taste of injustice for me anyway, and I've been raging against the machine ever since. So
these early experiences really do sort of set the path you go down in life, don't they? It has to be set. Yeah. I mean, I also have a story about a kid from my primary school who's now in prison and a teddy bear, but I don't think it'll add much, so I'm not going to go into it here.
It sounds intriguing, but maybe legally better not say anymore.
I think so.
Can we talk about recreation?
We certainly can.
What sort of games are you playing? I was split into like the infants and then the juniors. I think after year 3 or something, I went into a bigger playground, which was for juniors.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So it was the same for you, was it? Yeah. So what sort of games are you playing in the 2 different playgrounds?
I was usually the ringleader, I have to say. Certainly in the juniors era, sort of year 3 onwards. Me and my best friend Matt Coe, who's been mentioned on this podcast quite a few times before, Diamond Joe Barter, and others, and we'd get together and we would play the Bill, always, all the time. And I would be PC Quinnen. I think Matt Coe used to be PC Slater, who was a very short-lived character, so I'm not sure why we picked him. And I think Joe was PC Loxton, who was blonde like Joe. So that was why we picked him. And we just used to go around solving crimes and going back to the station and talking to suspects and everything else and things like that. So yeah, I remember playing the Bill a lot.
Did you do the paperwork at the end of the day?
No, we were too busy for paperwork. No.
Okay. Yeah.
But then when Mr. Priest left as head teacher and was replaced by Mrs. Allen, who was quite a revolutionary, actually, she was very well regarded in sort of primary school head teaching circles. She introduced an initiative called Craze of the Month, whereby there would be a permitted toy or object that you could bring in for that calendar month to play with, and it would be permitted, and then it would move on to something else. So I remember there being marbles. I remember there being jacks. I remember there being, this is at the height of the Pokemon boom, I remember Game Boys being allowed 1 month. And maybe that was year 6 only. I think it might have been like year 5 and year 6 only. But Game Boys were allowed, so that Pokemon could be played. Pokemon cards were allowed. Then that was when, I think I've been over this before, but that was when the HTV cameras came, because Caution Primary was one of the only schools that actually allowed Pokemon cards and encouraged it as an educational thing because of the hit points and the mathematics involved and that aspect of it. And it did seem like HTV were around our school quite a lot because of little innovative things like that. We've been over the case of Paddy Ashdown resigning and then our feature getting bumped, of course. So yeah, the Craze of the Month, quite a revolutionary idea. I don't know if it still goes on, but it was certainly well received, while we were there, and it gave us a chance to do different things every month, as opposed to actual games. I don't really recall sort of playing, a bulldog or tag or anything like that. Really, I was much more of a role player.
Yeah, you were acting out gritty, real life street crime in the corner of the playground while everyone else was playing Tig. I mean, I don't really remember what we did in infants. I think that my recollection of infants is mainly just sort of running around aimlessly, like electrons in an atom. But in the juniors, when we went up to the bigger playground, it was very much, there would be a group of boys. Most of the boys, in fact, would play a game of football every lunchtime, which I would occasionally join in with. I can still vividly remember 2 of the goals I scored. I think I probably only scored 2, maybe 3 ever. But it was such a buzz scoring those goals because I never did. I can still remember both of them. I can still remember the first goal I ever scored, and that feeling was just like pure jubilation. So that was, I'm sort of amazed I still remember them. But then we'd also play a lot of line tag, which was a variation where you could only run on the markings of the netball court and the tennis court, whatever the courts were, which was quite fun. I think there was one called, I guess it was called team tag or something, where you would be in, someone would be it, and then when they tag someone, they would both be it, and then they would tag someone else. It would sort of accumulate. That was a good one. Stuck in the Mud, of course, which I think is a fairly universal game. We were strictly under the arms, though. This was not a through the legs thing. That seemed a bit old fashioned to us. Or possibly it was banned, actually.
Oh, right, okay.
To release people by going under the legs. And there was another game which I'm going to ask you what you called it, because I'm sort of fascinated by the regional variations in names for this game. For us, it was called 40-40 in. Did you have 40-40 in?
We did, yeah, 40-40 in.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you'd have a base, wouldn't you? And then one person would kind of be guarding the base. Everyone else would run off. And they'd have to get back to the base. If the person who was it saw you, they'd run back and say 40-40 in, Alex, or something like that. But I know there's variations. If you ask people from different parts of the country, they've all got different names to this, which I really like. But we called it 40-40 in. Let us know, listeners, if you had a different name for it. Or any other different games that you played in the playground. Obviously, this was during the British Bulldog ban, so we didn't play that. It was just a sort of infamous rumour that there was this game called British Bulldog that was really violent, but we never played it. Of course, there'd be the beautiful first day of late spring where you were allowed on the grass again. Was always an absolute highlight of the school year. And I was thinking about this as well with wet dinner times. What happened when it rained on your lunch break? Did you have to go in, or?
Yeah, wet play. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in the classroom or in the hall.
I don't know about you. It feels like it hardly ever happened. I can sort of. It feels like it happened
Yeah.
3 or 4 times. But we were in the southwest. It always rains down here. So I don't know. It just seemed like we were lucky. But
yeah, you're quite right. It didn't seem to happen that often. Yeah, but when it did, we would be confined to barracks. Absolutely. Were you ever involved in sort of school councils or anything like that? Were you ever voted in to represent your fellow classmates?
I don't think we ever had that. Don't remember if we did. No. So were you then? Did you have?
I was, yes. I was the year 5 school council rep. Yeah, for my class. Well, there was a boy and a girl from each class. Yeah, and did that for a year. It actually, me and Matt Coe had been really tight since day one. Really, we became best friends. We'd been in the same classes all the way through, and then we went up against each other for the school council job in year 5, and then we got split up in year 6. We went into different classes, and we didn't really speak again until we were about 16. After that, so clearly my ascension to power was the end for mine and Matt's relationship for a few years. We are best of friends now, and ever will be. But yeah, we were rent asunder for a while by being split up. I'm not sure why we were split up. I don't think it was a case of the teachers thinking, well, they get in each other's way and they distract each other all the time, so we better split them up. I'm really not sure why it happened. But yeah, in year 6, I went into Mrs. Hunt's class and he went into Mrs. Johnson's class, who had actually taught me in year 4. So yeah, we got split up, and then yeah, we didn't speak for a few years. That was quite upsetting, really, when we found out that we were going to be split up.
Yeah, that does sound tough. I had a kind of a classic group of friends. Well, I say classic. There were 4 boys. So it always makes me think of Just William. I don't know if you've ever read or listened to any Just William, but I think there were 4 of them. So it was me, Thomas, Richard, and Stephen, and we were, thick as thieves, and would do everything together. And then, like I said at the start, we were split up. Our class, something happened with the year group, and we sort of got split into 2. And I was the only one that went up, I suppose. So I still did hang out with them at lunchtimes and stuff, but it meant that when we went to secondary school, I went a year before them, and that was sort of paid to the friendship, unfortunately. So kind of similar, but
right.
Yeah, these things happen. I mean, our primary school was only 1 class per year group. I know county primary was bigger. I've always thought the idea of primary schools having more than 1 class per year kind of strange, just because it wasn't my experience. But I know my experience is quite rare. But then you get primary schools like in villages, or you used to, where it would be 1 class for the whole school. And I always found that really strange. Like, how does that work? But yeah, that's the marvels of the British schooling system. And I suppose
we had 2 classes to each year group. I seem to recall in our course of primary, so it wasn't too probably 60 kids in a year group, maybe 70. So yeah, not too difficult to manage. I want to talk a little bit about school events if I can. So not in the classroom, but other things that happened. The first thing I want to talk about is a sleepover which took place in the school hall when we were in about year 3 or 4, which me and Matt Coe attended.
Yeah,
I remember being shown episodes of a cartoon called King Rollo on a big projector screen, and then we all just bedded down and slept in the hall for the night. And I don't know why it happened. I don't know why it was assumed to be a good idea. I don't know what we were supposed to get out of it. Maybe just a bit of first experience of being away from our parents and staying away for a night, and more of that later actually, when we come to talk about outward bound events, which I would definitely like to do as well. But we had the sleepover. And what was your school disco scene like?
Well, they had them, but I never went to one because I was too shy.
Oh, mate.
I don't know why I didn't. Well, I do know it's because I was too shy. But yeah, I wish I had. I'd sort of maybe I'd have had more confidence later on in life if I had gone in early. But alas, no. What about you? I can imagine you being big on the scene.
It's ironic because I would never go to a disco now, of course, but back then, yeah, definitely loved it. I remember there being one. It was during the daytime. I think they put it on for us during the day as like an end of year 5 thing. I don't know. So all the windows had been blocked out, so it was like dark in the hall, and we had the proper DJ there and everything. But everything had to stop because the DJ had a CD or a cassette stolen. Well, he was letting the kids come up and use the microphone and stuff to say things over the PA, and at some point a CD got mislaid. And everything stopped. The house lights came up, and
there was that scratching noise when someone like takes the needle off a record.
Yeah. That was exactly it.
Yeah,
and everything got. I can't remember what happened in the end. I think things continued after that. Maybe he just found it underneath. Oh, sorry, it was underneath. I was in the wrong case or something. I don't know.
yeah.
But again, that was a bit of an injustice, I think. So yeah, the discos were quite a big thing. It was always once or twice a year, I would say. We would have a good old shindig. And yeah, the outward bound stuff. So we went to Kingswood on the Isle of Wight in year 6, where there was, and this was big time. You know, I can't remember if there were. Oh no, it wasn't go-karts. There were quad bikes. There was like big trampolines. There was archery. All of this sort of wholesome, activity and team building stuff. 2 main memories from the Isle of Wight residential. One is the extremely angry Australian bloke who was in charge of the merchandise. We all got the chance to go and like buy a Kingswood t-shirt or a pencil or something, and he was like, you'd be, dithering about what you wanted. Come on, tell me. Like, I really don't know what his bag was, but he was really angry and very short with everyone. And the other thing, I don't remember this myself, but my mum always tells the story, is that she came to meet the coach back in Corsham at the end of the week. I turned up and I looked really sort of nervous and sheepish, and she asked me if I had a good time, and I said yeah. And then she said, well, what's wrong? And I had left my Wellington boots behind on the Isle of Wight. I hadn't picked them up, and I must have been worried that she would tear a strip off me for forgetting the Wellington boots that I'd been specially bought for the trip. But everything was okay. And in fact, I remember when I got home, the first S Club 7 album was waiting for me there as a little prize for coming back safely. So R.I.P. Paul Catamol, of course.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's my big memories of the big Isle of Wight outward bound trip that we had.
And it turned out the wellies were in your hand the whole time.
Ah.
Yeah, we had a couple of outward bound. I mean, I've never heard that phrase, but I assume you mean like residential.
Yes, sorry, residential, of course. Yeah. And, with all, like I say, midnight walks and caving. I remember we went caving, which I didn't really like, but...
We had a couple. The first one was just a one-night thing, I think, to Slimbridge, Wildfowl and Wetlands Centre in Gloucestershire, which was a lot of fun. I remember it being a real buzz. Yeah, I mean, it would have been my first night away from home, I think. And then in year 6, we went to somewhere called Danny Wenalt in Wales, which is a sort of like you say, an outdoor centre. We went for a midnight walk and walked through an abandoned railway tunnel and went on a walk where we got so soaked that Henry Conrad, my friend, was threatening to just go home. To the teachers, who I think they talked him down, as it were. I don't remember a huge amount about either trip, but I remember really enjoying them.
What was the place called again? Sorry,
Danny Wenalt.
Right, it genuinely sounds like a Belgian midfielder who played 3 games for Sheffield Wednesday in 1995.
Maybe it's named after him. I don't know. I think it's just a Welsh name for the place. But yeah, we went to Big Pit on the way home. I don't know if you've ever been to Big Pit.
Of course, that's a school trip classic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The only time I ever had head lice was on the morning of a school trip.
Oh no!
And how's about this for responsible parenting? My mum sent me anyway.
Oh, she probably had big plans. She was probably going out with the girls.
Well,
but,
it was to Trowbridge Museum. I remember this. She always used to go over my head with the nip comb, before I went anywhere, especially to school. All of these head lice just fell out, and she tells a story. She says that I was really like wanting to go and keen to go, so she just combed them all out as best she could until she was happy that there were no more, because they were scuttling around all over the kitchen, all over in the sink. And then just sent me on my way. But I suppose head lice are a fact of life when you're in primary school, I suppose, isn't it? It's going to happen. But yeah, we did do our due diligence. So there were, I wasn't just pushed out of the door. We did try and get rid of them as best we could. So I apologise. Probably Matt Coe I was sat next to on the coach, let's face it. So Matt, if you remember getting head lice around the time of the Trowbridge Museum trip, this is my confession, and I'm sorry.
I can't imagine anyone being excited about going to the Trowbridge Museum. But
it was great. I remember. Yeah, I was very excited. Yeah. Highly recommend it. We went to Albury Power Station. That was another good one.
Oh.
yeah, that was excellent. I remember getting a red glittery Albury Power Station, my little stubby pen. Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, enjoyed that.
Classic school trip gift shop item there. Or the pens where you take one out at one end and put it back in the top and it changes colours like that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
and we've covered the Millennium Dome trip, of course, as well. That's already been spoken about. So yeah, we did a fair few.
All I can really remember is Westonbirt Arboretum, which we went to a couple of times. A lovely place in the southwest. Yeah, I think I could list a couple of other places, but it would mean nothing to anyone who didn't grow up in this area. So I'll resist. Maybe we'll do a bonus episode or bonus 5 minutes for our patrons where I just list places I went on school trips with no particular anecdotes attached to them, but not this time.
Oh, I've got one more sort of event I'd like to talk about, which I'm not sure I've covered before, but it's a story of, well, certainly my wife's sick of it, but I'm still raging at the injustice today. The Year 6 talent contest, which took place just before I left. This is actually linked into, you remember Mama Told Me Not to Smoke from the Dare Assembly? Yeah, you recall this. Okay, so after I performed this, the Year 6 talent contest was coming up, and I hadn't entered. And Mrs. Allen, the head teacher, approached me after the assembly and said, you really should enter in the talent contest. She said, if you like, I'll waiver the 50p entry fee. I remember this. I was allowed to enter without paying the 50p entry. So I did, and I performed Pick a Part That's New by Stereophonics, one of my favourite music videos. I think we spoke about in one of the episodes with Diamond Joe. But I performed this without a microphone and to the original track with Kelly Jones's lead vocal. So I'm not sure how anybody heard me over that, because obviously it was being played on the stereo and there was no amplification for me. But I came second to another 3 lads in my year who mimed to that ABBA mega mix that had been released the year before for the Brits. And as memory serves, they dragged up, and that won against my sort of genuine talent. Yeah. And I have to say it's burned inside me ever since as a raging injustice. I'm not sure who was doing the judging, but yeah, I've failed to let go of that nearly 25 years later.
Probably one of your first experiences of bribery as well, I imagine. Although maybe we can't say that. We can't accuse these lads of such things, but it sounds like a classic case to me. Someone's, got a little backhander there.
You think? Yeah, but possibly. It's the only way. I was good, man. I was good, and they just mimed. There was nothing to it.
No.
So I'm still ruminating on that all these years later.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you said earlier, these childhood experiences, they shape who we are today. So
should we get into some correspondence and talk about some of our listeners' primary school?
We probably should,
memories? Yeah. I think we've rattled on long enough, haven't we? I think we should give some other people a chance.
We have, yes. Okay, on our Instagram, friend of the pod, Hannah Kelly, says, Easter Festival. Along with the bonnet parade in assembly, you could also sing or dance. One year, me and a friend sang a song that in hindsight wasn't that age appropriate, or that engaging for an audience of mostly 5 to 11-year-olds. It was Dina Carroll's Don't Be a Stranger. The best memory of Easter Festival, though, was a performance I did with the same friend where we choreographed our own Irish dancing routine to Cotton Eye Joe. He got the loudest cheer from the audience and is still one of my proudest performances.
Oh, that is superb.
That is great. And yet another thing for the lineup for our summer party, I think.
So hang on, what's Hannah down to do? She's performing a Kylie and Jason number with Craig.
Yes.
Now she's doing the Irish dancing as well.
There was another performance that she did somewhere else. I forget exactly what it was.
No, it was at the Old Vic, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we're not going to have to do anything, are we? It's just going to be the Hannah show.
Yeah, basically is. Yeah,
that's great. I'm all for it.
Definitely the headliner. Also on Instagram, 90s Nostalgia Nook, friend of the pod, says, cartwheels were banned in my primary school, all because I accidentally kicked a girl in her little finger doing one, and she cried to the teacher. Bloody furious I was. I don't blame you at all for that. It seems quite harsh. I did ask them to clarify whether that was the incident that got them banned, and whether the ban was ever lifted. And they say, shamefully, it was me that got them banned, and it was never lifted for as long as I was there.
Wow. That's more primary school injustice.
Yeah, it's such a heavy-handed response, isn't it?
This is a theme that's emerging tonight, is that there's a lot of heavy-handed punishments being meted out for not very serious things. Yeah. I don't know, though, a kick to the little finger. I say this as a man who this morning didn't so much stub his little toe on the door frame as just run up and kick it as hard as he could, to the extent where I think I might have actually broken my little toe on my left foot. So I'm podding as an injured man tonight.
And that's why doors are now banned in your house.
That's exactly right. Yes, they are banned. They're not allowed from this day on. So this is it. I'm in here. This is it now.
It's a completely open plan, your house now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. No, there's just no
Fair
walls.
Enough. This is from another friend of the pod, UK's 90s nostalgia. One of my fondest memories was a lad at school called Ben. He climbed through the hole in a chair, which I assume is that hole at the back of those little plastic chairs. You know what I mean?
Yes, but
now that I think about it, that does seem insane. Maybe it wasn't a hole. Maybe it was just more like a traditional chair with like the backrest and then the two struts going down to the base. It must be.
It has to have been, surely, because
unless Ben was a borrower, I don't think you could get through the hole in the chair. But he says, so Ben climbed through the hole in the chair. He did it fine the first time, but the second time he got stuck. We all got extended playtime as the firemen were called out to cut him loose. Great times.
There was a kid called at my secondary school who you could fit into a locker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, you remember those lockers, right? But
yeah,
he could fit in there. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I also remember him once gluing his own eyes shut with some PVA. So let's move on.
Okay. And I did check with UK 90s Nostalgia whether they knew where Ben was today and also where the chair was. And they said, last time I saw Ben, he was on a date with my ex. That was about 20 years ago. And sadly, that chair is no longer with us. It was promptly put into the big school bin after being butchered by the fire crew's cutting apparatus. So what have you got over there?
Anne-Marie Rainey gets in touch to say that her favourite primary school memory, or an infamous primary school memory, I should say, is of her France 98 football with the Footix France 98 mascot printed on there, getting kicked over the fence by a bigger boy. And she never saw the football again, which is obviously very, very sad. And she also remembers being asked to write a story about the England-Argentina match, the round of 16 match, the day after it happened. Apparently, the class were asked to write down how they watched it and a little bit of a story about the game, which is actually a really cool thing. Actually, I think I'd have liked to have done that. I remember being allowed to stay up late and watch extra time, especially. So thanks for that, Anne-Marie, and I'm just really sorry you never got your France 98 football back. Also from Josie Booth on the subject of mnemonics. You know what I'm talking about, obviously.
No, is that like learning how to read and write?
So a mnemonic would be like a sentence which helps you to remember something else.
Yeah, okay.
So like if I said to you, for instance, yes, exactly, yeah. There was some. Josie went to school in Wales, so there might be some Welsh-specific mnemonics here. They didn't tally with anything I ever learned. So for the points at the compass, there's naughty elephants squirt water, which I am going to be using from now on. For the planets, men very easily make jugs serve useful, necessary purposes.
That's not easy to remember, is it?
Well, it's a lot different from what I was taught, which was my very easy mother just sat upon 9 pins. Also, I've never come across this before, a mnemonic to help you remember how to spell a word. So if I say to you, big elephants can always undress smaller elephants, that's a way of remembering how to spell.
Beautiful, is that right?
No.
Say it again.
Big elephants can always undress smaller elephants.
Oh, because,
correct.
Yeah. I just went off the first 2 letters and that was it.
So yes, so some interesting mnemonics there from Josie. Thanks for getting in touch with those. Like I say, we had the My Very Easy Mother one for the planet. There was also, Richard of York gave battle in vain would be the one that I would use to use for the rainbow now. But we were simply taught Roy G. Biv to remember somebody called Roy G. Biv, which is obviously just the initials of the letters. Yeah. Another one comes back to me while we're on the subject of mnemonics. Sorry, I'm off on one now. I think it's to do with photosynthesis, the sort of stages of photosynthesis. Mrs. Nerg. So MRSNERG would be the different stages, but that's a very vague memory. I could be totally wrong. If you know, get in touch because I'm not going to look it up. But thanks again, Josie, for letting us know about your Welsh primary school mnemonics.
Yeah, I love that. Also on Instagram, Feminist Parent 101 is actually Natalie, my friend Natalie, so it seems weird calling her by her handle, as it were. She says, I felt like I had the best sandwiches in my Little Pony lunchbox. The matching flask also felt particularly grown up. So another example there of the flask. I don't know what she had in the flask, but she said in the sandwiches she had cheese, beetroot, and mayonnaise, of course.
Ooh.
Which is quite a sophisticated sandwich, I'd say, for a primary school student.
If you're getting beetroot involved, aren't you leaving yourself open to the possibility of stainage, spillage?
Definitely,
I know beetroot is a very difficult to handle foodstuff in those terms.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say handle with great care, definitely.
It's very much a nuclear waste of the primary school lunchroom, isn't it? Beetroot. And on Twitter, Britpop Memories says, I was only at primary school for 7 months in the 90s. I assume that's because of their age, not just because they were so naughty. That's all they did. But I was only at primary school for 7 months in the 90s. But in that short space of time, I must have lost 6 footballs up on the school flat roof, which I think I can totally identify with. Schools just all had flat roofs for some reason. I think just to collect footballs. And then Request the 90s, good account on Twitter, friend of the pod, said, I went on a school trip to France in year 6 where I was given out of circulation francs by my parents and was introduced to Mortal Kombat by my French pen pal's brother. Is there anything cooler than a French pen pal's brother? That's like the coolest person in the world, isn't it?
I'm just imagining a guy in an Adidas tracksuit top smoking Gauloises, and with maybe like a little wispy moustache.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of.
If they're primary school sort of age, they're probably those chocolate cigarettes, but they're chocolate Gauloises.
Yeah.
I asked if they managed to spend the francs, and they said yes, they did try, and they failed. Well, if you do want to get in touch with your primary school memories, I should say we do have a pending story from legend of the pod Kate Pro regarding a plastic dinosaur's tail and someone's nostril, but that is TBC. But if you have any correspondence, anything you want to tell us about your primary school experiences in the 90s, please do get in touch with us in the usual way, which is linktr.ee/allright90s podcast. The link is below in the episode description. I don't know why I bother reading out the link really, because just click on it.
Click on it. It's there. Just click on it.
Yeah, no one's writing this down with pen and paper, are they? So yeah, click on that and send us something from your past, your primary school days, because we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for listening to our rattle through some of our favourite primary school memories. I realise there's a lot of, as there tends to be when we get together and have these chats, Alex, there's a lot of local references and references to people and stuff that maybe maybe our listeners won't quite be able to link in with. But we hope there's enough there to paint the picture of what our respective primary school experiences were like. Just to round us off, I have a little challenge in mind, a little quiz. Can you name all of your primary school teachers in order of year?
I think I can, yeah. Mrs. B, or Mrs. Bartholomew, aka Mrs. B, followed by the feared Mrs. Morris. Then I think it was Mrs. Norris who was like standing in. Then Mrs. Armstrong. And then Mrs. Stevens was standing in for Mrs. Armstrong, and Mrs. Fraser, and then Mrs. Melville. It was all female teachers at my primary school until just before I left. There was a male student who joined, but I think I can do it. Yeah. What about you?
It's funny you should have started with a Mrs. B, because I started with a Mrs. Me, M-E-E. That was my reception year teacher. Then there was Mrs. Cook, Miss Musters, Mrs. Perry, Mrs. Johnson, Miss Rigby, and then finally Mrs. Hunt, who only taught at the school for 1 year. So I was the only class that she ever taught at Caution Primary School. I remember her leaving at the end of that year. But it's funny how these names stick in the mind, and obviously these are people who we thank for doing what they did for us in our formative years. So if any of you happen to be listening, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and say hello and just let you know how grateful we are for everything you did.
Yeah, absolutely. We owe a lot to you. You were important characters and figures in our young lives. So respect for that.
Right, well, that just about wraps us up then. In usual time-honoured fashion, again, no idea what we're talking about in a couple of weeks' time, so we'll let you know as soon as we do. But until then, it's goodbye from me. I'm just off to buy a new pair of Wellington boots.
And it's goodbye from me. I'm just about to go off and sit on the wall to have a quick dry off.
I've got a terrible ulcer, which is really, really troubling me at the moment.
I hate him.
You want to see it? No.